Welcome here to this evening's webinar, Leadership in Disruptive Times, Real World, Real Leadership, delivered by CEIBS Professor Jack Wood, and brought to you this evening by CEIBS Global Executive MBA Program. My name is Marcel Austin Martin, and I'm Marketing and Admission Manager for the Global EMBA Program. Delighted to be your host and MC for tonight's webinar. We've really received overwhelming response to this evening's webinar. We had to even go back to Zoom and increase the number of registrations we could take. Such has been the interest in this, which I'm sure reflects the relevance of this topic at this very challenging time at the moment for everyone around the world. We have three fantastic speakers who'll be joining us this evening. First of all, of course, Professor Jack Wood, who'll be delivering the first part. Then we'll be joined by two of our fantastic alumni, Jessie Lien and Olivier Brault, for a panel discussion and for questions, of course, from the audience as well. Let me show you how the evening, the webinar will play out. I'm going to give a very short introduction here at the beginning. And then we will hear from Professor Jack Wood for the main lecture, if you like, for about 35 to 40 minutes. After that, I will invite our two alumni to join Professor Wood for a panel, which I will moderate myself. And then we've left plenty of time, I think, for questions from you, the audience. And we do really welcome your questions, and I would encourage anyone to put your questions forward, and we'll do our best to answer them towards the end. Just a word on that. For your questions, please submit these through the Q&A function in Zoom. Okay, so the chat function is actually disabled for our audience. You might receive one or two messages from us through the chat function, but it's disabled for the audience. So any questions, please submit them through Q&A function. We'll collate them here and do our best to answer those at the final session, the Q&A session. And please don't feel you need to wait until the end to submit your question. We do have a really large audience here watching this evening, so it really makes sense if you want to put your question forward earlier. It means you'll have more chance of being answered when we get to the Q&A towards the end. So to introduce a little bit about our professor this evening, we're actually in our audience tonight, we do have many current and past global EMBA students, and I think for them, Professor Wood needs no introduction. But actually, most of our viewers in the audience today are actually not CEIBS students, and so may not have come across Professor Jack Wood. So just to introduce a little bit about him, he's been a professor at CEIBS for close to 8 years now. Before joining CEIBS, he was with IMD in Lausanne for many, many years. He's had a very distinguished academic career. His sort of area of interest is really looking at experiential leadership development and looking at the role of unconscious processes in leadership. And he works a lot on group dynamics, and this really flows through into his teaching as well. He has complemented his academic work with several years spent in the US Air Force on active duty. So he really knows his leadership. And he's been a fantastic professor for the school in this leadership area. So for many of those of you who've been through our program will be familiar with what I'm going to introduce here. But I want to introduce this just one slide to talk a little bit about one of the key aspects that Professor Wood brings to CEIBS Global EMBA Program. This is what we call the leadership module. And it's an 8-day experiential module, and it's the very first step that all of our global EMBA students go through. When they first set foot on campus, they'll be here with 100 other executive students, and they'll go through this very intensive leadership module with Professor Wood. Of course, our program is a 20-month program. They'll go through many different topics and subjects as they go along, but this is front and center, the first step in that 20-month learning journey. And the way that Professor Wood develops this 8-day module is really so that the students, they don't just learn. He won't just teach leadership, but they'll actually really experience it and really learn how to exercise leadership responsibly. So you can kind of see from some of the photos here that it's not your typical business school, business management education module. It's really quite different. Of course, we have classroom discussions and case studies like a normal module, but actually a lot of the time will be spent doing this kind of experiential exercising leadership that's so important. Professor Wood brings from his network of executive coaches, and last year we had, I think, 35 executive coaches that come from around the world, and they are with us and with the students for the entire 8-day module. Every student gets assigned one executive coach that works with them through the whole module. And you can see here, again, the photos give you a bit of an indication that there's really a lot of one-on-one coaching sessions. There's a lot of peer-to-peer learning and feedback. And one of the centerpieces is actually what many of these photos represent, which is our sort of challenging outdoor group problem-solving exercises. And if you look at the two top photos, you can see the coaches there, they're the ones dressed in black. And you can notice there that they have video cameras. So actually, through these challenging exercises, our executive students will be have the video taken of them throughout those exercises. And that footage is then used between the coach and the individuals on the program to really analyze in great depth their behavior and how they respond and act in a team and group dynamic, and how they are as leaders. So it's a very, very intensive, very experiential, but this is year on year. It is really the feedback from our students is really one of the most fantastic parts of the program, and it really lays the foundation for the rest of the 20 months. So this is what Professor Wood brings to our global EMBA program, and it really is a fantastic module. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea about what he does for the program. Tonight we're going to see him in a bit more of his traditional approach, which is delivering a short lecture here for you all through this sort of online mechanism. So with that, I would like to invite Professor Wood, if you could join us through your video and audio.
Okay.
If you could turn on your video, and great, we have your screen, your slides.
Okay, you should have me on, no?
We have your slides, we just need the video
okay.
on.
Okay, start my video, good.
Fantastic, there we go.
Okay.
So I'll let you take it away, Professor Wood.
Okay, well, thank you. Welcome, good evening, or if you're in Europe like I am, it's good afternoon, or if you're somewhere else, it may be good morning. We're going to be having a conversation about the disruptive times, and the subtitle on the slide that you're looking at now is learning from your experience of change. And as we go along, I'll be looking at some concepts that may be helpful for us to understand the change that we're in. Okay, so I like to start off my sessions with a quote, and this one is by Sun Tzu. This is not a great English translation, but those of you that are Chinese or read Chinese can read the original. I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And the reason I like to use quotes like this is because they ground us in a historical context. And if we're trying to understand what is going on with the disruptive times now, and we consider historically disruptive times, we can see that the same kinds of patterns exist over and over. And what we're going to try to do today is see if we can give you a framework or a couple of frameworks to understand your experience and what you've been experiencing. if you look at learning from change, you can think of it in two ways. There's a passive learning and there's an active learning. And the next slide I'm going to show is from National Training Labs. And it basically recapitulates what Chun-Si had said. So passive learning, listening to a lecture. Okay, so listening to a lecture, we retain about 5% of what we hear. If we read something, we retain about 10%. If we look at an audiovisual film, we retain about 20%. And if we someone actually demonstrating something, we retain about 30%. But active learning is different. And it's related to Sun Tzu's thing. If we do something, if we experience, then we start to integrate that experience into our understanding, and it lasts longer. So when we work together, those in the Gemba program and myself, we do a lot of group discussion, we do a lot of physical practice, and we do a lot of teaching or working with others in our group, doing feedback that way. Now, people come to a program like the Gemba program, and they come for conscious, rational knowledge, okay? But most of what drives our behavior is not rational. Knowledge is not behavior. And just getting knowledge or just getting rational cognitive concepts is not enough, I don't think, to actually learn leadership or actually to make sense of change. So what we try to focus on is the unconscious, irrational, and emotional elements that occur with us, okay? So this is what the block schedule looks like. Marcel was talking about the module, and that's what the 8-day module, that's what the 8-day module looks like. The blue sessions are the leadership sessions. It's a full 8 days, and it's packed. And it's all in little boxes. And in the morning, we try to do conceptual framework. And in the afternoon, it's more experiential stuff, so that we start to integrate the framework, the logical, rational frameworks that we have, and the actual experience of what it is that we've been talking about in the mornings. But this is what we're actually doing in the program. There's a preparation phase of the program, or you can think of it any session. And then there's an orientation where we start to put a frame in place that we can actually understand. There's an exploration of what it was that we've experiencing through the framework that we've got. Then there's an integration process, and then there's more preparation. So this is essentially how we learn from our experience. This is another quote. It's by Jack Welch. Business school professors love Jack Welch. I don't particularly love Jack Welch, but I think it's an interesting quote because it illustrates a key concept that we work with. When the rate of change outside exceeds the rate of change inside, the end is in sight. Now, what Jack Welch is saying probably is when things were changing outside General Electric faster than we as a company are able to change, then we're in trouble as a company. But you can also look at that as an individual sentence. That is, if things around me are changing faster than I'm able to adapt, then I am in trouble as an individual. And it's helpful to be able to look at both of those two levels at the same time. An example is, if you remember when we were kids and we looked through a microscope and you look through something on your slide and you have a particular optic, and then when you shift the optic, a drop of pond water, a drop of blood, a wing of a fly or something like that, you start to see a different reality. The reality hasn't changed, but our optic has changed. And if we can use optics that help us understand things at deeper levels, then we can take those frameworks, and that can help us to exercise leadership or to manage changes or to improve how we do things. So when people come to a program like the Gemba program, this is, or any other senior executive program, they're looking for tools. And so they'll come in class and say, okay, Jack, give me some tools, something that I can use next Monday with my group or my team. Or give me some tools that I can work with my family. But tools are different than instruments, and tools are like screwdrivers and wrenches and hammers and saws and chisels, and they're made out of metal, and they usually do something to someone or something. But I think rather than tools, it's much more helpful to have instruments. And you are the best instrument for exercising leadership that you have. So it's a shift in focus from looking for a concrete tool to paying attention to how you feel or how you experience or what it is that's going on with you. The question, what is happening to me if I am at home? And what is happening to those around me? Or if I'm having a Zoom with my team, what is happening to me in this conversation? And what is happening to the people around me? That's using yourself as an instrument to find out where everyone is. And that's a more effective way to exercise leadership, particularly in disruptive times, but at other times as well. So the questions that you were in the promo for the webinar, how do you experience the pandemic disruptions these past months? How do you personally experience? And what patterns is this context forcing upon your awareness? So our experiences shift. Basically what's happened to me, and still in Europe this is the case, in China there's starting to be a disaggregation, but basically work and home have collapsed in some way. And before the pandemic, we would jump in our car or go get on a bus or get on the tram, and we would head to work, and then we would sit and work, and we would have meetings, and everything was structured in a particular way. And then we would break, go back onto the bus or the tram or back into our car, go home, and then we were in our family. And what's disrupted is our patterns and our rituals as things were condensed and they collapsed together. And then we're confronted with different kinds of experiences. You may have found yourself as an executive at work. Now you're a teacher at home, going through and teaching your children how to, do their elementary school math or their elementary school language studies. So you find yourself in a place where you're anticipating that you would be in one role and you find yourself in another role, and it can tend to be somewhat disturbing. So what happens with these changes? I mean, how can we make sense, or how can we put a framework on which we can understand these changes? Okay, there's a difference between opinion and knowledge. Okay, so, and what you hear a lot what I certainly do a lot on YouTube or videos or reading the newspapers and stuff is the world has changed forever. And for some people it has changed. If you've lost someone in your family, if you've lost your job, things have changed in your life. So in some ways, yes, things have changed. And in some ways, things haven't changed. And if you consider the 20th century, for instance, and all the changes in the 20th century, you had World War I, you had a pandemic in 1918 that's called the Spanish flu, but which originated in the United States, apparently, in Kansas, and was brought over with the soldiers to Europe. And that flu killed between 50 and 70 million people worldwide. Okay, and then after the flu was over, then you had the Roaring '20s, then you had the Great Depression, then you had the various revolutions, World War II, you had the Chinese Revolution, you had the Bolshevik Revolution just before and during World War I. So we've had changes all along, and then people are resilient, things go back to normal, although there is a new normal, but the new normal, I think, tends to be very similar to the old normal. Okay, so as we have to navigate this change, let's see if we can understand some of the variables that are at play. So this is a guy, Frederick Hudson. So he's a psychologist, and he did something on the cycle of renewal, and he basically said life changes. Now this is not for most of us. Most of us go through this pattern, and those of you that were former Gemba students or current Gemba students haven't done this particular piece of work with me, but I thought it would be helpful given the content of the webinar, to talk a bit about this one. So this is what Hudson came up with. With unanticipated change, life is a bit like a roller coaster. And I don't know if you found that, but you have to start reworking how to get food, whether to wear masks, whether not to wear masks, and whether how far away to stay from people. Lots of information is exchanged over the internet. So in some ways, as isolated as one can be, there's also, ironically, a way in which one sometimes feels overwhelmed by the changes that are going on. So life can be a bit of a roller coaster. And if you want to think of it this way, we have a life chapter and we have life transition. And the life chapter is our uptime. Okay, so that's periods of directed activity, time to plan things, to have goals, to accomplish stuff. So this is a life chapter. And then there's a life transition where we start to shift and go into downtime and start to work and reorient in a different way. I'll explain more about this in a moment, okay? So life chapters with 4 phases. So we're all the time putting our lives together and taking them apart. When we are mainly putting ourselves together, we're in an early phase of a life chapter, a period of relative stability, predictability, and challenge, okay? So this is a bit before the pandemic or before any significant change in our lives. And then when we are mainly taking them apart, our roles and our storylines shift as we try to rewrite the narrative of our lives. So there's a shift from the way things are done normally to being forced to actually shift and do things in a different way. Life chapters are about accomplishing something important with your life, having a career, raising your family, reaching a goal that knits your life together in a meaningful way. So, and let me stress the word meaningful. We go through life, I think, searching for some kind of meaning, to make meaning out of what it is that we're living. And when the meaning that we put in place no longer works, then we start getting nudged into a transition. And the life transitions are a pulling away from the chapter that we're in and either making a mini transition or a major transition. So it's an opportunity to turn inward, to soul search, to find a new sense of yourself, to discover a new and vital spirit and meaning, and to envision new ways to be yourself in the years ahead, okay? So this is the normal pattern. So once again, a life chapter, external goals and plans, focuses on doing, accomplishing things, action and results, and then the shift to an internal focus of reflection, questioning our own beliefs and introspection. I suspect that many of you listening to the webcast, when you were in your house and you couldn't go out and you're with your family, started to think about and reflect about some of the assumptions that you had been holding. And it starts to put a different lens on how we're able to understand and view, for instance, our family and our work environment. So it's a shift from an external focus out there at work to an internal focus of trying to make sense of things. Okay, so phase 1. Let's pay attention to the feelings and emotions first and then get over to the activity. So when we're fully aligned, okay, our feelings and emotions are focused. We're directed, we've got lots of energy, we're optimistic. There's a lot of communication, continuous improvement, lots of passionate leadership, and our team members are aligned, okay? Or our family is in a good place. So everything's going fine, okay? Useful activities in this phase: planning and communicating, assembling a good team. This is a work-related list, having strategy sessions, goal setting, process setting, established feedback and reward systems, aligning organizational processes to support the goals, strategies, objective and tactics, and removing barriers or else going around the barriers that are keeping us from going. And then what happens with us, and most of us have experienced this several times during our lives, what happens is we go into this other phase, okay, called we call it the doldrums. It's a wake-up call. And the feelings here are disenchantment, disengagement. You wonder, did I really pick the right profession? Do I really want to do this for the rest of my life. One of my colleagues when I was in graduate school at Yale University, a sociology professor now, he said his supervisor gave him one of the best pieces of advice that he got in grad school, and it was never become an expert in something you don't want to do for the rest of your life. And so most of us have reached this point where we become a bit disenchanted or disengaged, distracted. We feel a negative attitude, we're critical, tend to be complaining, blaming others, low productivity, and feeling cynical. Now this looks like it's bad stuff, but it's actually quite helpful. But we have to pay attention to our emotions. And this is what many of us at home or at work make a mistake about. If you've got a team and they're feeling disengaged or distracted, we try to be their cheerleaders and say, oh no, don't feel disengaged, just cheer up, everything will be fine. And the problem with that is it absolutely denies or invalidates how they're feeling. And if we stay with how they're feeling, if your kids are feeling unhappy or sulky or something, or your team's feeling restless, the first thing you need to do before you get to work is tune into them. And in order to tune into your team, it's helpful to tune into yourself. So useful activities in this would be for a mini transition, is to provide constructive forum for venting, get professional coaching, consider personal therapy, increase your communication, focus on solutions. I'm feeling this way, how do I get out of the box that I'm in? Try moving forward, work to regain some sense of control and determine a path forward, Now, there's two ways that we can go when we start to feel this way. We can do what Hudson calls a mini transition, or we can go into a major transition, And so this is a mini transition. And in a mini transition, we ask ourselves, what do I hold on to? What do I keep the same? What do I let go of? What do I newly take on? And what do I now move towards? A mini transition would be like this. Let's say you're down here in phase 1. Everything's going fine. You start to ask yourself, something, I'm not happy in my relationships. Things at work aren't going well, or something like that. And then so we get here and we just decide to go back here. So if you're working for one consulting company and things aren't going well, or you're not happy, then you just do a mini transition, go to work for another consulting company. What tends to happen when you do that is you go through the same process again, and after working for the new place, then things start to feel uncomfortable again, and then you go back and join a third consulting company or something. That's not the only alternative, though. The major transition is the way really out of that jam. So this is the way a major transition works. We drop down to this cocooning phase. Feelings and emotions in this spot, and I suspect most of us have had some of these feelings over the last 4 or 5 months. There's some feeling of anxiety. I don't know if I'm going to lose some of the people in my family. We start to become introspective. We shift to an inner focus. That's not necessarily bad to pull away and withdraw if we're pulling away and withdrawing in order to understand things more clearly. We tend to take stock, search for some meaning, explore deeper purpose. What do I really want out of my relationships? What do I really want out of work? What am I in this for? We tend to question our values and beliefs. We rework the narrative of our lives. Gee, I thought I wanted to be a financial person, but I really want to be a professional coach or something. We let go of the attachments that we have, and it's important to allow yourself to actually feel the losses that you've felt in these changes. Useful activities, joining some retreats, journaling, PPIN, I'll just explain that a second, which is a kind of an autobiographical statement, When students are coming to the first module of the Gemba, one of the requirements is to write a personal and professional identity narrative, So it's a story of your life. And the precursor for this was when I was in graduate school. My supervisor said, Jack, I would like you to write a professional identity statement. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, here's a little paragraph. It just says basically, where'd you come from? Where are you now? And what do you want to do with your life? And I said to him, you've got to be kidding. And he said, no. And I said, why do I have to do this? And he said, well, would you like to graduate? And I said, yes. And he said, well, then do it. So I said, okay. So I started writing it since it was a requirement, and I was a bit resistant. And then after a couple of evenings, an hour or two a night, I started to see patterns in my life that I had not paid any attention to. So the process of actually reflecting on my life helped me make sense of it. And it was one of the most helpful exercises that I had actually in graduate school. And so for the programs that I work in, I ask the executives to spend some time, write a 5 to 10 page paper. There's instructions for it on an autobiography. Other things that are helpful to do when you're in the repurposing phase: writing down dreams, spending time with real friends, because you have to differentiate. You know, you spend a lot of time doing social obligations that you're not really that happy about, or that you're getting dragged to, and then maybe you have the opportunity to rethink, okay, what do I want from friendships? What do I want from my relationships? Commit to some depth therapy, allow and value emotions, some quiet contemplation. Maybe you get a meditation app or start to meditate every day, explore alternative meaning of life, and you focus on being, not doing. Because much of the time in our lives, we spend time doing stuff, you know, like driving here, driving there, having meetings, stuff like that. And we don't spend much time being. And one of the opportunities of the pandemic has been, for me and the people that I know, is a chance to sort of sit back and actually reflect and reorient what it is that we're doing. Okay, then the next phase that we go through, the feelings and emotions start to shift, and we start to get a bit curious. We start to explore. We look at different ways to be creative, things that we've left behind. Maybe we left music or art or something behind when we were in grade school because our parents told us that you wouldn't earn any money that way. Or I was in the Air Force with a guy, and he was an engineer. He trained as an engineer at the Air Force Academy, but he wanted to be a historian. He liked history. And his father had told him, no, you know, you should be an engineer because then you can make some money that way. And he said to me, so now I realize that, you know, my father was right. I'm an engineer. It's very practical. You can do stuff with it. And I said, well, you know, what happened to history? And he said, well, you know, it just isn't that worth it. You know, Henry Ford said, history is bunk. Don't pay any attention to it. And I said, well, how would you like to wake up tomorrow morning with no memory? Because your individual memory is history. And our collective memory is our collective history. And so the kinds of feelings that and emotions that we experience tend to allow us to experiment, to trust ourselves more. You know, what we really want, not that we're doing something because we're trying to fulfill our parents' wishes, but that we decide to do it because we want to do it. We become tentatively optimistic. We feel a bit freer, we feel excited by possibilities, and we start to feel more affection towards others. We get sort of out of ourselves and start to see in other people other things, okay? So the question I would leave you with for the moment is, where are you in the cycle of renewal? Are you going forward? Everything's fine? Are you in doldrums? You're kind of like starting to feel discomfort. Are you cocooning, or have you gone through the process of cocooning? Or if you haven't and you feel as though you've missed something, maybe it's the time to do that. Or are you getting ready to start over again? Now, one of the ways to think about change, okay, is we have a pattern to our whole life, okay? And one of the readings, when those of you that will be coming on the program, or even if you're not, consider writing a little autobiography. One of the primary developmental tasks of life is to establish a satisfactory life structure. Okay, and this was a book by Daniel Levinson, 2 books, Seasons of a Man's Life, Seasons of a Woman's Life, and there's a short article that you will have access to after the webinar. And so what does that mean? Okay, so early in our life, we go through the first transition, okay? So, and the first transition we go through is this one. It's when we leave home and we go to university, or when we leave home and we get our first job, or when we leave home and go into the military. And that's an early adult transition, okay? And we're usually around 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. And then what happens is we start our first life structure. So we get into a marriage, we have a child, or we start a job, or all 3 at the same time. And then around age 30, we start to question whether this is really what we want. And so there's an age 30 transition period where we start to question. When we get to be midlife, and this is the sort of midlife transition or midlife crisis kind of thing that has tended to be a bit of a joke, but it's actually quite an interesting phenomenon. We start again thinking, well, okay, we have one more chance to shift gear, reorient our lives, and decide what we really want. So these are important transitions that we go through. And then at the end of our lives, usually when we're approaching retirement or something, we have to, you leave your access card to your company, you leave your company, you leave all the familiar faces that you have seen there and everything, and you have to decide what to do for the last part of your life. And so these are major transition periods. Now, what happens is the period of disruption and the age of the people in the Gemba program basically are between 30 and 40 years. So it's in here. So many of those of you that have been on the program or will come on the program are going through this period of transition, okay? And thinking through, okay, what do I do with my life? And what the pandemic has done is it's added more disruption to periods that are ordinarily disrupted. And so the process of reflecting on what we really want to do and where we really want to go is an important one. And in fact, in order to make any progress or to continue, we have to do that. So what you'll end up seeing is you'll go through this little cycle that we've been talking about before in each one of these phases, okay, as we go along. Okay, so what does this all mean? Well, life presents us when we're young with 2 existential questions, okay? Who am I? Okay, so who am I? Am I my father's son? Am I my mother's son? Am I myself? And you can see you change, you've experienced this change. For instance, before you have children, you think of your family as the family of origin where you're from. And once you have children, you start to become a mother or a father, and you're not just a son or a daughter. And each one, and that shift in role is another identity. And that identity has a whole new language. The kind of conversations you have with your same gender's best friends are different than the ones you have with your grandparents. They're different conversations than you have with your children. They're different conversations than you have with your bosses. So these different personalities that we carry around with us are actually different identities. And so the first question is, and it stays with us, is who am I? The second question that stays with us is, what do I structure my time? How do I structure my time here on Earth? What is it that I fill my time with? Okay, and these are 2 critical questions. And when we go through a period of disruption, we get to pause and say, okay, who am I really? And how do I structure my remaining time here on Earth? And both of these questions concern our core identity and our core individual identity. We think of identity as an individual thing, but our individual identity is really a social thing. It's our first identity is formed within our family. then within our school system, then within our work and jobs and our friendships. And our identity has these different facets to it, but it's important that we spend some time thinking about our identities and the shifts that we're presented with or forced into our awareness during periods of disruption. Okay. So if you take time to reflect on who you are, it's also helpful to take time to tune into those in the groups around you. Okay. So here's a couple of books. These are not assigned in the program, but I do use them from time to time. One is Games People Play. It's by Eric Byrne. It was the highest selling psychology book until Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence. It's the psychology of human relationships, and then leadership and self-deception, getting out of the box. So it's a more specific thing about leadership. Okay. Okay. We're going to open it up. I believe Marcel is going to take back control of the video and then open this up for a conversation with Olivier and Jesse, and a conversation with you, so that you're also involved in the webinar. Okay, Marcel?
Thank you very much, Professor. Some really interesting stuff there, and look forward to getting into some more here with our panel. So let me first of all introduce our two panelists here. So both these people here have been well, actually Jessie Lien started the Global MBA 5 years ago. And she was actually she was in the first batch that Professor Wood led his leadership module with. Jessie is General Manager in China and VP of Marketing and BD in APAC for Cardinal Health. So being in pharmaceutical healthcare, I'm sure very, very challenging times for her. And we're very grateful to have you with us. Hello, Jessie. And Olivier Brault, who actually is from our most recent intake. So he just joined the program late last year, where he did again go through the leadership module with you, Professor. And he's General Manager Asia Pacific for Suprema. And Olivier is a Canadian, but living here in Shanghai. So if I could ask all three of you to join the discussion, please, with video and audio. Great. So thank you, Professor, for the initial lecture, and thank you both to our two students and alumni for joining us this evening. Jessie, I might start with you. Maybe if you could just, to give the audience a bit of an idea, just introduce a little bit about yourself, the organization that you are working for, and your role within that, and maybe also just some thoughts on how the last few months have been since this all began here in China and now around the world. Jessie.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Marcel, for your introduction. And I'm Jessie Lien as an introduction before. So I'm the China GM for Cardinal Health, and I have another role. It's Asia Pac marketing and business development for APAC region as well. And I am the Gamba 15 alumni, and it is my pleasure to be here and to share some thoughts during the COVID-19 or post COVID-19 with all of you. And I think, as I mentioned, my company is also a top healthcare company among the world, and also for the top 500 Fortune. And during the past, I think 3-4 months, and it went through a pretty challenge journey for every one of us. And for myself, and actually I stuck in US for my Chinese New Year, and I have to work with my team day and night, and so it's a very memorable holiday for me. And I think, as Jack would just mention, I think for myself and also my company, I think we went through some change journey. and we from like pretty shocked with this pandemic situation, and we said we have to do some reaction to our team, to our customers, and also we get another like adapt to this kind of situation, try to support the hospital's services, and also we get another change is like a worldwide, not only China be impacted by this COVID-19, but I think today we are trying to do like as a new normal. I think we can share some detail in the following conversation, but I think it's really a very good learning for myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessie. So Olivier, if you could just, same thing, just introduce a little bit about yourself, your organization, and something about your experience the last few months. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Marcel. And as you said so well, so I'm Canadian. I've been in China for 13 years already. So I came here as a young chap, and now can say I'm a seasoned China executive. I'm married here also to my wife is from China. I have a son. I've joined CEIBS in 2019. I've been the general manager of Soprema for 8 years already. Soprema is a multinational from France, from Strasbourg. It's more than 100 years old. It's specialized in waterproofing products. So it's actually a very stable industry. So when the economy goes down, we repair leaky roofs, but when the economy is booming, we build new buildings. But of course, once we have the crisis of the coronavirus, all of the job sites have stopped. Okay, so it's been quite challenging times for everybody. We realize, and me personally, I realize how bad we are to project the future, okay? Because I remember on January 21, I was boarding a plane for a sales meeting to go to North America, but the whole situation in Wuhan was exploding. And in my mind, I was not understanding how quick this could come to Shanghai, because, we say Wuhan is so far away in our mind, but, a train is only 5 hours from Shanghai, but in our mind as human beings, where we project so badly the future, we couldn't really grasp this. But maybe this is just me, because my wife was already stocking food, on January 21, while I was trying to reassure her that everything would be good, So it's good that we're talking now about this leadership program, because this coronavirus has been a very practical use of our leadership, both in the office but also at home. Okay, so we train so much in this leadership program, but actually when we live it, this is when we realize how everything clicks together. I kind of enjoyed the time sometimes when we were stuck at home for 6 weeks, because time was frozen. There was zero opportunity cost because we couldn't do anything else. So in a way, this was a good time to reflect on how we want to manage the business and how we want to review. I took very well advantage of this crisis to realign the company and the team together. And we're going to talk more a little bit about this, but it's really the fact that we had 6 weeks at home to really plan well. I think that in a way, we got out of this crisis in a good way. I'm talking about China because for us, we've been back to work and productive since at least 1 month. So thank you.
Thank you both. Just before we go on, just a reminder to our audience, feel free, please, to submit your questions through the Q&A function, and we'll try and get to those at the Q&A session a little bit later on. But for now, I'll continue with a few more questions for our three panelists. So Jessie and Olivier, you're obviously based here in China, both of you, and managing teams, no doubt. So given the distance, the restrictions on travel, the sort of uncertain environment around finances and commercial situation, and the sort of constantly changing external environment, how do you go about keeping your teams motivated, your subordinates and your teams? How do you go about keeping them engaged and motivated and on task through this time? Maybe Jessie, and actually, as one addition to the question is to think also, we were talking about your teams at work, but also about your personal life as well, the teams that you're dealing with on a family basis and personal life as well. If you could compare and contrast them, that would be very interesting. Thank you. Maybe Jessie, you could start.
Thanks, Marcel. I think, yeah, I think in the past, I think several months, and nobody can imagine this kind of sudden pandemic impact our life. So I think at the beginning we have like a several stage, exactly as Jack Wood just mentioned for the cycle. And at the beginning, I think nobody knows for this kind of things how long it will be last. And so so I think when we will start a remote work, I think most of the team are happy to stay at home for a while. And even for myself, and I never stay at home with my son more than 2 weeks together. So during my, the working time. But until now, I think I already stay with my son. We can have like every night I can stay with him, and probably already 3 months. So this is the change at the beginning. So we are happy to have some time with the family, and but I think for our professional part at the beginning, we immediately to set up a pandemic team, and which we think we need to deal with. We need to someone from the function, and we can make some quick decision internally. So this is in our China team, in Asia Pac team, in global teams for different level. So after that, I think the first stage is for how can we care about our team. So when they stay at home, what is the working principle, and what is how can we utilize the digital to work together, and how can we give some supply for their personal protection equipment or PPE. So, and this is at the beginning, so how can we communicate with the team, and how can we get some support with their the protection equipment is the first step we did. And I think in the middle of them, I think it's we still stay at home, and probably it's in the middle of February to March, and we can see some better situation, but we still cannot go back to work. So we start to think, and so how can we utilize this time, not only stay at home, but also can build some muscle internally for some training, and also for some for the customer engagement, because during that period, the customer also get a pulse key. Our team, most of our customers are physicians, are hospitals, and they are one side they treat for the COVID-19 patient, but the other side and more the elective procedures, all these kind of things, or slow down or locked. So how can we support them during a long distance and as a remote work? It's another action plan, like the external workshop, and so try to engage the customers and share with the COVID-19 experience with the customers. And this is another part we did, and we try to ask the team to working with different, you used to be in in-person visit, but during that period, they have to do the WeChat or the conference call with the customer who are not willing to do this before. So I think this is for some change for our working behavior. And in the middle of March or the end of the March, and it's in China, our situation getting better. So we can have some, we try to motivate the team, say, hey, it's a time back to work, but we need to encourage them to visit the customer, because our customer in the hospital. So they need to wear the protection equipment, visit the hospital, and also come back with safe. So this is another things we need to work on, how to help them and motivate them, and also keep them safe and their family safe. But we also need to get back to this kind of situation as a recovery, and also now, and I think we have a better recovery for our business, and however we still remain some long distance work and also remote work, even the travel still not coming back to normal. So we still come this kind of behavior as a new normal. And I think the team also went through some curiosity and uncomfortable, but I think they are now to see their outcome. Like we have some external workshop, we can have like 20,000 participate from the physicians. So they think they have some different way to service their customer. I think this is some real case in my company. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Jessie. Olivier, same question for you. How have you managed to sort of keep your team motivated through this time of distance and external challenges?
Well, as I come back to January 21, this was the day when they closed the borders to Hubei. So they quarantined a whole province. And I was on a plane between Shanghai and Montreal to attend a sales meeting. So when I landed, it seems that the whole world has suddenly changed. And then Shanghai started to send out messages to say you have to stay home. All of our teams were already in their hometowns for Chinese New Year. So everybody was separated and nobody could move anymore. And WeChat was the only platform. But there was kind of a torpor and people were frozen. The WeChat was more or less radio silence for a while. And I was still in the mood, okay, I need to talk to headquarters. We're talking about next year's budget. So I was still not, adjusting or aware of the actual situation that was happening. And then the first mistake of leaders is, in a leadership position, is to try to reassure everybody when there's kind of a chaos or crisis. But then we realize, and I have to thank my wife for this, it's like, stop trying to reassure me, do something, So this was the big wake-up call for me because my flight between Montreal and Shanghai was canceled. Air Canada canceled all the flights. And my wife was saying, okay, we need to do something. We need to get organized. Then I realized for my team was the same thing. They don't want to receive messages and emails how things will be fine and everything. They want to get moving. So what happened at that time, a few days after that, they started building the Leishan Hospital, which took 10 days and was all over the news. And we do waterproofing material for roofs. So I launched this idea into the company, which was Radio Silence WeChat group. I said, how about we just build that roof? So then everybody started calling general contractors and logistic companies all through WeChat from their home and living room. And then suddenly 3 days later, we were talking to the Wuhan construction company and they needed waterproofing, and we sent some workers against curfew in the factory. They loaded the truck. It took 2 days to get everything organized in terms of license. And then suddenly we were all over the news, So just by moving all the teams, suddenly there was no more panic, no more people frozen, and it brought the whole team together in this way. And it made people really proud because also this project it was portrayed as saving the country and bringing the country together. So when I launched the idea, I really did not think we would be able to do it, but because we have so many big competitors who are more connected. But I realized just our small team just managed to get this done. And then it brought us to a stage where when we came back from the crisis, people were a bit more like, normal. They were already out of that crisis mode when we started office, just because of this this event that we've been through, and only through WeChat. So that was quite something.
Thank you. Professor, I want to just draw you in here. And I just wanted to ask what you've observed through your years of learning and teaching and so on, the difference between how people tend to manage the change or turbulence on a professional context compared with how they might do so in the family and personal context.
I mean, I think, can you hear me okay? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I think there's a tendency to compartmentalize, and sort of, when we're at work, we try to be very rational and stuff. And what tends to happen is we suppress how it is that we're feeling. And at home, when we try that with our kids, it doesn't work, right? Because they don't care how rational we are. They're not really even looking for advice or to be told what to do. They're looking to be listened to. And if I were to characterize effective leadership, it would be more to integrate both our conscious understanding of what's going on, but also the emotional tenor of the group or of the family. I mean, so you have to check in with the people in your group and with your family. When I start working with a team of consultants, the first thing we do is just check in and say, okay, so how is everybody? And we're not looking for, oh, everything's great. We're looking for how things are really, because if we don't know where everyone is emotionally and psychologically, then we won't be able to align ourselves to start going in a particular direction. You know, if you think of a motivation, the word motivation comes from the same root word as emotion. You know, it's to move. It's to move from, someone asked in one of the questions, what is leadership anyway? Well, basically it's to get a group from A to B, wherever A to B is, you know, with some task. But in order to do that, you have to have them emotionally engaged. And so then you have to be able to sense where emotions is. So what we do in the Gemba work is try to integrate the sort of rational cognitive frameworks that we have and sort of the emotional experience and stuff so that we're more integrated. Because if it's not done, then we end up being disintegrated, which is what might be happening in the world today. So the virus actually presents us with an interesting opportunity, because there's been increasing polarization, certainly in the United States, some in Europe the last 4 or 5 years. But the virus gives us a chance to depolarize, to find a common humanity. And what I've been impressed by is the struggle between political leaders sometimes pointing fingers at the other country. But what I've been impressed by is the scientific leaders, scientists working together so, okay, we're all in this together. The virus doesn't care what nationality it is. It doesn't care what gender it is. It doesn't care how much money we earn. It doesn't care anything about that. And we've been spending a lot of time, particularly in the West, you know, creating illusions, you know, that there is no such thing as facts. You know, there's just, it's just marketing. You know, we can make something look better. It's a perception, we'll change the perception. But the virus is saying, this isn't a perception, this is a fact. And if you don't pay attention to this fact, and if you don't work together, you will die. So you better be realistic about how you approach this. And that's an opportunity to collaborate. So you can see leaders, this is a long answer to a short question, but you can see leaders like Angela Merkel who say, we are following the scientists' orders on this. We're going to do a responsible job. You know, they didn't politicize it. They didn't blame anybody else. They started to work together. And then Germany does relatively well, you know, and the European, you can see the leadership, you can see how well a country is doing as a reflection of the leadership of that country. And so if you look at the United States, there's this chart, you know, like, I showed you guys before, where you can see over a period of a month the increased number of cases, where it's like almost 1 million cases in the United States now, and you know, with over 50,000 deaths. And you can see other countries who have been bringing that down, and so it's an indication of how the leadership is done, whether in an integrated way or a disintegrated way, blaming other people, that kind of stuff.
Great, thank you, Professor. I have a question, I think, for Olivier, I think, if I may. And I want to talk about kind of centralization and decentralization of companies, because you obviously, you have Asia Pacific responsibility, but your company, I understand, is originally from Canada. So have you observed through this kind of turbulent time, has the company been more willing to sort of grant greater autonomy to your business unit, to your geographical area, while they're putting out fires in their home turf? Have you observed a kind of a trend like that? And also, just as a follow-on, is how you sort of maintain your connection with HQ, and how does that work?
Well, so Prima is quite special because it's a multinational. There's around, 70-something factories around the world. It's a family-run business, but it's totally, well, let's say 90% decentralized in terms of management. So this decentralization is sometimes a headache when things are running well, But we realize in crisis mode, then it seems there is no impact at all, that there is some parts of the business that are totally shut down. So what happened, let's say in the communication with HQ, is when we were shut down in China, HQ was reassuring us, and no, don't worry, you'll get out of this, it's okay. And then suddenly we got out of there, and then they were hit. So in Europe and in North America, and then suddenly was radio silence for a while, right? But for us, we were busy getting back on track. We have our own production, we have our own purchases, everything. So in a way, it was more the communication was shut down, but it wasn't really impacting the business because of the way that this company is structured. It's mostly structured like this because shipping is so expensive for us that everything is produced and designed locally in each country. This is why this company is also 110 years old, because it's been through 2 world wars. You know, it's actually not Canadian, because since it's so decentralized, we don't even know where it is from, but it's from France, from Strasbourg, just across the river from Germany. And it's been, let's say, invaded twice, in the First World War and Second World War, and it always survived. So in a way, decentralization is, I think I would recommend that if you plan to have a company for 100 years old, because you don't know what will happen. So yeah, so now we respect that, and I hope we can maintain that for years to come.
Thank you, Jesse. I saw you sort of nodding emphatically. Has that been your experience too? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I just want to echo the Olivier, and I think for us, I think we are a company set up in China not long. I think we probably only have 5 years experience in China, and before that, it's more like a U.S. Centric company, and even with some experience international. So when this happened, I think at the beginning, as I said, we have the China pandemic team, we have Asia Pac pandemic team, we have a global pandemic team. At that time, I was in US, and I had to have the day and night meeting with different groups. And but finally, I think fortunately, the Asia Pac, they feel the local team know what they need to do. And especially, actually, we are a company manufacture masks, and also for the goggles and for gloves for the worldwide. However, the most of the manufacturer based in China, and one of the gongs manufacturer in Wuhan. So it's a pretty dynamic situation during that time. We have challenge internally because we have the life related immediately at that time. However, the global are suffered by supply. And I think we have different worry about the issue during the early period. So at the beginning, we are fighting with them to see if we can get more allocation, but the PPE for the employee here, for the customer here. And but I think for myself, I got pretty good empower with Asia Pac. I think my leaders, my Asia Pac president said, make the decision and don't worry about for the approval process, because in sometimes everyday change, I think the first 1 to 2 weeks is a very critical time. So what's your, how do you treat with your team, and how can you, if you need to buy the masks locally, buy it, whatever our manufacturer or not our manufacturer, but do it for your team as a right behavior. And if you need support for the customer, do some donations, and the things, if you think the right thing, and the right partners, try to do this. So we have some internal process and approval process, but I think some urgent decision making we made ourselves. So I think this is the right thing we do. We own our the responsibility. And for the for the post COVID-19 for China, and the global gets mass, and for Asia Pac, and for a global team. So actually we have some experience, and now it seems we have more experience to share with them. How can we treat with the remote work, and also how can we make the supply be recovered to support the global, and also for some, so what kind of things we should make with our customer. So I think this is also during that part, and we have never practiced this before. even we have some practice like a crisis management before, but it's not the real case. When things happen, I think the local decision, and also for the quick decision, accountability, exactly what we need during that journey.
Okay, thank you, Jessie. I want to actually stay with you now, Jessie, because the professor talked a little bit about not just corporate leaders, but also government leaders. And I just wanted to ask what sort of elements that you see have been most helpful in the crisis, and whether you observe any differences between leadership as exercised by males and leadership as exercised by females. As there has been some suggestions that some countries with female leaders maybe have dealt with the crisis better. So I wanted your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think that's also a very good question. And to be frank, I think there is no like 100, we don't do a test or examination at 100% score for this kind of leadership in this kind of pandemic. I think from my personal experience, I think especially at the beginning, nobody, even myself, I don't know, maybe some experts or some scientists, they predict how long for this pandemic will take on, and also what is the economic impact, like the McKinsey or some consulting firm did some this kind of analysis. But at the beginning, I think nobody has 100% correct solution. So for my experience, I think take the ownership and make some decision. I think it's right to the team, and try to cross-check with the China leaders. It's one of the things we practiced. And the other thing is, I think I'm pretty fortunate to have the ownership, because I think sometimes there's no like the guidance from global what you need to do. So I think the ownership to your company, to your team, even to your family, and I think it's pretty important during that journey. And for myself, maybe optimistic, and in my PPIN, and I think it's also optimistic is one of the strengths for me. It's to see, try to not only see for backward, because I think if compare with the performance because our physical year is mid-year to mid-year, and our first half year is pretty good, the sales result and also the performance, but actually immediately shut down. And so if we look backward, it's very difficult. So try to see more forward. What is the creative thinking? What is, how can we convert or how can we go through for this journey? Maybe it's one area we can work on. And also now it's pretty helpful for this kind of mindset to my team members and also to my Asia Pac colleagues. And another good thing is work as a team. We have some slightly internal competition in Asia Pac for different countries, for performance, for everything, and the resource. But during that period, I think work together as a team is pretty important. We never thought we can support each other for the protection equipment, for the, what kind of information resource you have, what kind of prediction you have, what kind of business model you did. I think we share this each other without any, selfish. So I think this is another reflection on that. For the question about female leader or male leader, to be frank, I didn't see a significant difference, and probably there is someone like for gender part, maybe male more like a full pictures, big pictures, what is directions, and for the female leader maybe more care about the emotion part and also for some operation part. But I think during that journey, I do see decisive leader for both female and male. So this is still, I don't think it's a big difference based on that.
Thanks. Professor, do you have anything from your observations in terms of that male leadership style, female leadership style?
Well, I just noticed that there's two ways to characterize it. One is male style or female style. Another one is sort of like task-oriented and rational, or relationship-oriented and emotional. So I mean, you know, the research on leadership done in the 40s and 50s was outstandingly clear. The two things have to get done. First of all, leadership's done in groups. So even if you're the president of a country or the prime minister of a country or a CEO, you work in a small group, okay? The executive committee, the board of directors, or something like that. So you're working in a small group, and you've got to work with the people in the group to get them mobilized in the same direction. And so you have to listen to them. Let me give you an example. When the British military select officers for the army for Sandhurst, I went there and did a study and watched them. So they do a week of outdoor exercises. And so you're in a group and you go from A to B, an obstacle of some kind, you know. And the people that are there, that are selected, aren't the ones who are dominant. They're not the ones who are bossy. They're the ones who listen to everyone else and integrate a solution for the whole group to accomplish the task. So it's a process of integration, not telling people what to do, but actually integrating them. In order to do that, you have to listen, not just to the text of what people are talking about, but to the subtext, the emotional subtext of where people are.
Great, thank you. So we do have some very good questions coming in from our audience. So I will turn to that in just a moment. I'm going to take this chance, if I can, for both Jesse and Olivier. We've talked a little bit about, obviously, the module that Professor Wood leads at CEIBS. Could you share a little bit about your experience on that opening module, that 8-day leadership module, and how that was for you? Maybe Olivier, if you want to kick us off.
Thank you, Marcel. I think this is actually a tricky question because we've all been sworn to secrecy after completing the module. We're not allowed to divulge any of the experience that we've been through. But I can say this, that it has been life-changing experience because I think, yeah, Professor Wood repeated this today, is that first, to be a leader, you have to know yourself. You also need to know how you project yourself to others. So how do others react to you? This is very important. And this is the lesson of the coronavirus, is you have to understand where you are, where you stand, because if you are trying to exert a kind of leadership in an environment that is not fit for it, or that is changing, and then you completely miss the track. So I feel there are some exercises about situational awareness that I really remember in this leadership program, but I believe that maybe next year we can replace this with coronavirus crisis to figure out how to react as a leader in this time of world-ending kind of event, you know. And I'm very glad that I took this class a few months before, because my time of reaction was so much faster because I was properly trained, let's say. So thank you, Professor Wood.
Fantastic, thank you. And Jesse, obviously 5 years ago now that you were here with us on that opening module, but if you could share a little bit from what you remember.
Yeah, I think it's also a tricky question, because I think you're trying to see, especially for Jack Wood, if I still remember the 5 years ago knowledge. And so I think it's really a memorable journey, especially because we did this kind of in the opening model and for the leadership journey. So I think you shared some of the contents like peer-to-peer feedback, outdoor activities. For my side, I think my most impressive is, I think everyone come to the class. I think more than 50 genius leaders come together, and nobody want to listen to the others. and everyone think they are the smartest one in the class, and whatever in the class or in the outdoor activities. However, after this kind of like a 1 week journey, and we do think we only, before that, we think we only see myself as individual, but after that we see us as a group, and how can we work together for different personality and also different style of leadership. And that is also one of the model we cooked, and also we built our relationship in the class. So I think that is the most memorable module for me. And also for Jack Wood, and he shared for some why this happened, what's the behind thinking, and especially with some videos, and it's a very good reflection during that part. So thanks, Professor Jack Wood.
Great, there you go, Professor. Both approval, very good. So we have several questions coming in, and we've just been trying to collate them here. So I am gonna, and again, if people do still want to submit questions, please feel free through the Q&A. But I'm gonna start here with questions that we've already received. So let's jump in here. Professor, I think this is probably best for you. We have a very good student in the audience today. This is from Diana. Talking about the cycles of renewals that you talked about in these transition stages. So is it common to bounce between them, to be somewhere between, say, between phase 3 and phase 4?
Yeah, no, I saw the Q&A actually. Yeah, look, it means you're still you're working on it, which is helpful, right? So you're going from the doldrums down to cocooning, and then you're starting and exploring, and then going back and rethinking it and starting and exploring. Is it's perfectly normal. It doesn't mean it's necessarily easy, but it means when you come out of it, you will be. I suspect you'll have clarity on what it is that you want to do, and who you are. That shift in identity. Yeah, so that's perfectly normal. There is no sort of script to it. Sometimes it can take months. Sometimes it can take years. I know that's not necessarily reassuring. One of my supervisors, when I was studying to be an analyst, said, an in-depth psychotherapy takes about 3 years for you to integrate all the changes. That doesn't mean you're suffering for 3 years. It just means you're working hard at understanding who you are and what your place is in the world and what the meaning of life is. So.
Great, thank you, Professor, and thank you to Dinah for the question. We have a question here from Jen. We have touched on this a little bit, but maybe Olivier might get your perspective here. So the pandemic now is driving people apart all around the world. So what kind of leaders are needed on a global level to work on this big threat? And what kind of leadership traits are demanded here? And do you see any among the current leaders? Olivier, maybe if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, as much as we would love to have a global leader, we have to realize that being a global leader doesn't work. So Professor Wood also said that leadership is exerted in a small circle. So you can only influence so many people, and mostly it's people around you, especially when borders are closing. You can only do the work around you. And this is kind of a networking of leaders that are grouping together. So you cannot have one leader that will group the whole world, especially in these times. So you have to only influence the people around you and hope that the people around you will influence other people. And you have to hope that in different countries, this type of leadership will also learn from other leaders around, either through news or other places. But at the same time, we realize in terms of crisis, it's not the time to learn from others in different regions. I can reflect this in terms of our own company. You know, we have people in Italy, in Bergamo, in France, and they all had to relearn from zero every time like the shutdown happened, instead of saying, okay, what happened in other countries and how do we react to it? Everybody just started from zero. And I think the whole world was also the same way. The only kind of region that reacted quickly was Taiwan, I think. But all the other regions were just so slow to react. And there's all this talk now about leadership is like, how come people were not listening to the forecast of scientists? But I'm sure we will find out in the next 2-3 years of reflections, how come, yeah, nobody was listening to anybody, you know? But to come back to it, yeah, focus on the people around you. That's all you can do.
Can I say something on just to piggyback on what you're saying, Olivier? I think there's a misunderstanding between the word leader and leadership, and it's a common misunderstanding because a lot of languages use leader as the person that's the one that's doing this, and leadership is a process. And in a team that's really working well, the leadership passes off or moves from one individual to another. And that's one of the things I've tried to work clearly into the Gemba program, because when you're working as a team, the leadership shifts to the different individuals, whoever is at that moment the one who has the best idea to move things forward. And if we invest all of the authority in one person, then it's inevitable that that one person will not be able to solve the problems. And if they think that being a leader is that you have to be the solution to the problem, then your leadership is not going to be effective. What you need to do is understand, if I'm a leader, I want to create the conditions where other people can contribute and that authority is distributed. And if I don't necessarily give up my formal authority as a leader, but I allow everyone else to sort of manage the process. If somebody else can steer the boat better than I can at that moment, fine. That doesn't mean I'm not a leader. It means I recognize that leadership needs to go to this person at that time. So it's a subtle distinction, but I mean, it's a really important one, I think.
Thank you, Professor. You've actually kind of answered what was going to be my next question, which was from Gordon Lin, which is, what is the definition of leadership and the essence of leadership? But I think you've grasped that quite well in your answer just now. But Gordon also asks, how is the CEIBS Global MBA Leadership module different from other business schools?
Who are you asking that to?
Well, probably you, Professor.
You're the marketing guy. Look, I can tell you from my perspective the difference. I don't know any other business school that comes into the first module and spends 8 days seriously working in depth with people to understand who they are and what leadership is. And they'll start with accounting and finance and marketing and strategy and all this other kind of stuff. But if you don't get the core of, because you do so much group work in the Gemba, you know, you do little projects, you do case discussions, you're always going into little groups. And if you don't understand what's happening in the little group that you're in, you're never going to be able to effectively exercise leadership. But if you get that up front and in depth, then that's something you can carry with you no matter what's going on. If you're in an accounting class and you go into a group to discuss the accounting problem, if you're in a strategy class and you go into a group, there's leadership exercised there. And so it's the basis, actually. And if you don't get that right, the rest of it is just cognitive, getting ideas and, you know, the networking, whatever, which is important, but it's not enough. Okay. So it's the accent has to be on the behavioral or the leadership stuff to make anything else work, no matter what kind of industry you're in, you know. Some of the questions have been on, like, you know, a supply chain and stuff. All that stuff needs leadership. And you can see, Olivia, you mentioned, you know, sort of business leaders or political leaders, even in the United States. So some of the regional governors, because President Trump is inept and Washington has so much trouble exercising leadership in this crisis, that the leadership is being taken up by the governors who are working together with other governors. And no one's officially in charge. You know, it's not like the governor of New York is in charge of the governor of Maryland or anything like that, or the governor of California is in charge of the governor of Washington. They're working together as peers, and that's leadership as it should be exercised, particularly if there's a default on at the top. So.
Thank you, Professor. I have a question here. It's from Elaine, which is to both the two students, Jesse and Olivier. And the question is this: any suggestions on BCP, so Business Continuity Plan? What are your opinions on the business continuity plan at most Chinese companies? Have Chinese companies done enough to implement a well-planned business continuity plan and get their managers and employees trained for it? Jesse, any thoughts in that area?
I think this is, yeah, I think mostly because we are in like a post-COVID-19 period for China, and most of the company, they are in this kind of, whatever we said, business continuously or business recovery period. And before this, we definitely need for some preparation and also some actions to do so. And I think it's maybe a different industry. We have this kind of, we internally for Cardinal Health, we do have a process. We said the business continuously process. But when we really went through that, and we feel each company or each even the business unit, you have your different situation and or different industry. But so you have many factors or like employees, supply. So based on your industry, based on your hierarchy in this kind of the vertical industry, so you will have different business continuously preparation. I think I do see even in the same industry like healthcare, we are the industry is first a big impacted. Now we have faster recovery, and however, even in the same industry, different company have different kind of reflection based on this kind of business continuously. So I do see some of them did pretty well, and because they didn't waste the 2 months or 3 months to wait for the business come back by its own. They already start to think for their supply chain and the manufacturer, material supplier, and business and sales and marketing. And for this kind of different process, are they face the challenge during or post COVID-19 or impacted for worldwide or only China itself? But some of them, because they think we are only like China branch, MNC company, we are just a sales and marketing organization. So we are waiting for some supply or some, the services from the global. So that makes more difficult when things getting worse in worldwide. So I think this is depends on, but definitely considering this kind of business continuously earlier and considering these more broad different functions work together will have different outcome. And for China made, we do have some players in this market is local companies. To be frank, I think their reflection or their I don't think they may have not a longer business continuously, but because we was being hurt earlier, and so we are being recovered earlier. So I also see some of them in our industry, they grab this the opportunity to grow their business worldwide. And there used to be only a local player, but now they have some footprint in worldwide because for the needs for the worldwide. But also some of them, they didn't think so long. They just think, how can we supply currently? And they meet some opportunity and windows to expansion for their opportunity.
Thank you. Olivier, anything to add on that side of things?
Well, in terms of business continuity, we'd refer to Suprema. I've brushed on that subject a bit before, is that we are completely decentralized. So for us, this was the business continuity plan. It was not thought it may be in this way, but the fact that each unit has the authority to go about on its own, we were much quicker in the regions that got out of the virus, let's say, shutdown. We were much quicker to come back. And at the same time, we are able to give authority and as the professor would say, leadership. We transfer leadership to the people that can really solve the problem. So we don't really have an actual process for this, but the structure of the company made it that it was very quick and easy to get out. So the day that they opened back the gates, let's say in China, that allowed us to come back to work, we had sales, I think, the day after or 2 days after. So we were quite well structured to respond to crisis without having an actual process called BCP. So maybe in times of economic growth, we have pains because we are decentralized and because we don't have globalized processes. So transfer of know-how is difficult and help between subsidiaries is difficult. But then when there's a crisis, we see the benefits of having such type of a structure.
Okay. Thank you. I have a question here. I'm going to stay with you, Olivier, for this one, if I can. A question here from Dita. How have you experienced the transition from co-located teams to everybody working from home? And what would your advice be if direct leadership is having a problem coping with this situation? And how to motivate my team if the leader is above is not able to?
In terms of how to change the management style in moving away from the office, we realize when people are not close to us, we just have to be more clear first on on who's in charge, and then to delegate authority to just let them do it, because anyway, you cannot watch them. They're not close to you. So you have to trust people more. You have to be more clear. So in a way, this has simplified a lot the organization in terms of organization. But at the same time, I've realized that people have been much less distracted since this crisis happened. So before, everybody had like all these thoughts about the different careers, maybe changing company, getting more salary pressure from parents, from kids, from wives. Suddenly, when there's a huge crisis, everybody is just more simple, So everybody is more aligned in the company. People want to just get out of this situation. And because of this, we've been able to achieve so much more, even if we were apart. We got into we didn't perform so well in the months before the crisis, but now we're overperforming, compared also to our own industry. So this is just because we woke up, we aligned, we simplified things, and we realized we don't need to be close to each other to accomplish this. Okay, so for us, this also reduced a lot our desire for travel, for business travel. I think we're going to be able to save a lot of costs later by doing a lot more remote work than we used to think we could do.
Thank you, Olivier. A question for Professor Wood from Willie, who I think is actually one of your classmates, Olivier. Willie asks, how does this pandemic reshape the traditional definitions of leadership? It's said that we never learn. SARS was 17 years ago. The Great Influenza was 1 century ago. Professor.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't think. Look, sometimes business school professors will write books on the new kind of leadership. I don't think there's a new kind of leadership. I think the same as it's always been. But what the pandemic does is it confronts us with bad leadership, or ineffective leadership, or blind spots that we have. And what it forces us to do, like Olivier just said, what it forces us to do is like rethink what it is that we're doing and simplify things. So it kind of puts us in the same boat. And when we're in the same boat, if you want to motivate people, put them in the same boat. Now, if you're going to sink or, you know, as a boat, then you're extremely motivated to cooperate. And since this puts us in the same boat, then there's an extreme motivation to cooperate and not fight with each other. So,
thank you. We're just starting to run out of time, but I do have hopefully a couple more questions. One here from Mathieu, which is to both Jesse and Olivier. As experienced leaders, what are the key things you want to have achieved at the end of a working day, whether it's a crisis or not?
Maybe I can start.
Have a go first, sure.
Well, what I want to accomplish at the end of the day is to make sure my team is still with me, you know. So sometimes as leaders, we try to think we have to accomplish tasks, but actually tasks get accomplished by everybody much quicker than they will be by us. So for me, what I want to make sure at the end of the day, no matter how many things happen today, is my team still with me, aligned with me on the same boat, as the professor would say. Otherwise, if I'm at the end of the day and everybody is stranded in different islands, then tomorrow will be such a headache just to bring people back on, you know. So that's what I need to accomplish every day.
Great, thank you. Jesse, anything from your side?
I think for myself, this is a little bit big word, because I devote to healthcare industry, because I do think how can we help people is one of the goal for myself. So I work in this industry for more than 20, I think it's more than 20 years, and so for my side, during this whatever pandemic or not, how can we help people? How can we support the physicians and patients is probably one of the goal I would like to do. And the other side is to find the people and work together, and especially during this kind of challenge, we cannot meet each other, and but we have to conquer this kind of challenge journey together, and we don't hate each other after this kind of challenge or the pandemic, even for the daily life. And we still think we selected the right partners, and I think that is it's very important. And the other thing is, I do want to see my son, and he is pretty proud what I have done. And he said, my mom saved lives by masks. So it actually is not my major business, but I think it's pretty proud, and when we can help the others.
Thank you, Jeff. Very good. A question here I have. One of the challenges in a VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous time. So one of the challenges in a VUCA time for leaders is to deal and lead with uncertainty. So what will be essential in setting up direction? Lots of the time we can't see the direction. So what will be essential in setting up the direction and in leading change by inspiring your people? Professor, maybe?
Yeah, okay. So let me start with leading change, and then I'm going to ask you to read it again because it's a complex question. Okay. So the leadership is often presented as if it's only about change, but it's also about stability. And so the question is not, you know, like, and I think professors get enamored with, or thinkers get enamored with, you know, change is good, and, you know, and disruption is good and stuff like this. But I think it's much more helpful to say there's a light and a shadow side for change and a light and a shadow side for disruption. And effective leadership, it takes as much leadership to maintain the integrity of a country or a business as it does to change something. And some changes are disastrous. You know, I've seen lots of changes in organizations where it ends up driving the organization into the ground, and it's a change, right? So, and I think the consulting companies sometimes make money pushing change because that's what they can sell. But I think you need to be aware that stability is just as important as change. Now, go back to the question, because
yeah, let me try and, if I try and simplify it. So what is essential in setting up direction and in leading the change by inspiring your people?
Okay, so basically what you've touched on is a couple of fundamental things. I mean, I've got a kind of a leadership model. Those of you that have been on the program have been, had it inflicted on you with a peer review. But okay, so like basically, as I said, leadership's done in a small group, and there are two elements, you know, getting the task done and paying attention to the relationships. So those are fundamental, okay? Now, in the process or the functions of leadership is having a vision, which is what you're talking about, communicating the vision, motivating people, and then controlling or guiding it. Well, there's a difference between controlling like over-controlling and under-controlling, and you don't want to do either. And then there's two elements that are much more humanistically oriented, which is situational awareness and self-awareness. Like, who am I? Am I up to this job? Do I have the technical competence to do this, or does somebody else have more technical competence than I do at this particular moment? But also the situational awareness, which is what you're talking about, which is a very layered understanding of things. So it's like with the, if people on my team have better radar or sonar to pick up stuff, then I want to listen to them. You don't have to be the smartest person in the group or on your team if you're the leader. You just have to recognize when somebody that's smarter than you are has an insight that actually you can build and move towards, okay? So it's more like opening an awareness. And the awareness is, you don't have to solve the problem, but you have to be aware of who might have a better idea than you do, or how you can integrate these ideas. So it's much more of leadership is much, for me, it's much more of an process of integrating other things rather than announcing solutions and being the technical expert and stuff like that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Professor. We have just run out of time, so unfortunately we won't be able to continue on the Q&A. We've tried to get through as many as we can there, but please, if I can take this opportunity to really thank Professor Jack Wood, to Jesse and to Olivier for giving your time this evening. Some really fascinating insights, and really, I think it's really appreciated to have the academic side, but also the practical experience from our two alumni here. So thank you very much for giving your time. Thank you also to our audience. I do just want to drop a quick note to those in the audience that we do have another webinar coming up just after the May holiday, so that's on May 12th, which is again a 7 p.m. start. A bit different to tonight, so we are bringing in 4 alumni again for this next event, but it's going to be very much focused on the Global EMBA program. So all 4 of these have gone through our program at different times. We have an alum from 2010, one from 2014, 2017, 2016. And really the objective is for really just to hear from them, to share their experience on the program, their experience with the school, their experience as alumni as well. And so any of you who are watching who have an interest in the program, highly recommend you to try and join for that webinar as well. You can scan the QR code there, and that will take you through to our event page, which will give you the details to make a registration. Really good chance to learn more about the program. If any of you watching do want to know more about the program, I'd be very happy to take your inquiries. You're welcome to email me, that's Marcel there on the bottom left of your screen. Our website's there in the middle, and for those of you using WeChat, that is our WeChat account. Then we have events that are coming up. We have some professors' insights and sort of alumni insights. A lot of really interesting stuff coming through there. So we'll be very happy to take your inquiries if you'd like to know more about the program. So that wraps things up for us here. Thank you again to Professor Wood and to our 2 panelists. Really fantastic having you, the 3 of you, with us this evening. Thank you also to our audience for tuning in this evening. Really appreciate that. And thank you all and have a good evening.
Marcel, just a quick question.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, okay. There's a bunch of open questions, like 26 open questions. Are those going to be open so that they can get answered or what? I mean,
well, what we will do to follow up from this is that we will contact those who have attended, and actually we will provide your slides, Professor, as well as a couple of case studies that I believe you some documents you also
a couple of readings
relevant to your speech. So we will be sending that out by email to all the registrations, including those who maybe missed it tonight. And my suggestion would be if people do have questions unanswered, and there certainly are a few, we've done our best, but if people have questions unanswered that maybe we could channel them to get a response to that from you, Professor?
Yeah, I mean, I can just stay on for a bit longer or something, or if you don't close them out, I can just answer them. You know, and if that works.
I'm not sure we're able to kind of remain online,
okay.
But it might be possible then if, like I said, if we followed up through email, if there was something kind of a question unanswered.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Does that sound okay?
Okay.
So yeah, apologies to those who have had the questions unanswered, but we will do our best. As I say, we'll be following up with everyone, and there will be a chance to continue that dialogue, hopefully beyond today.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you again to the three speakers this evening, and also to our audience. Thank you very much.